Get ready for Solomon's Porch Podcast. Hey, giving the glory to God. Yeah, you're hanging with Jason and Shawn. Get ready for Solomon's Porch.
All right, welcome back to another segment on the show. Joined again with our good friend Jason Motley. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So that song was "Can't Stop Us Now" by Lecrae. He released this a couple years ago from his All Things Work Together album, and so it kind of fit in the current time of what's going on now and the emotions and the segment we're going to talk about. So you know, like everybody in the breathing world knows that the death of George Floyd that happened a week ago or over a week ago now, and the protests that have come out as a result of that. And I've seen Jason post a lot of stuff on social media, trying to clarify some things, trying to get some things off his chest and mind, and answer some of the, I guess, random posts that you've been seeing. So what's kind of been your thoughts on the whole situation?
One of my main thoughts has been these protests are not about Floyd. Just people seem to lose the fact of it's not about him. It's about the injustices that have happened within the black community now for centuries.
Right.
He was just a catalyst for this particular one. Before, with the LA riots, it was, oh my God, I can't remember his name now.
Can we all just get along?
Yeah, well, he got beat too, but he was
Rodney King?
Yeah, Rodney King, there you go. Yeah. But I do have a post that I did put on Facebook that actually got shared quite a few times.
Well, I think a lot of things is like, I think it's a lot of assumptions that take place during these things. Like people are only doing this because of this, or people are only doing this because of that. And I think you can't assume anybody's intent. And I've shared that so many times on this podcast.
You just shouldn't.
Yeah. It's not smart. It's not wise to assume people's intent. And you still looking at? You got it?
Yeah, I have the post up.
Okay, go ahead.
So this is a post of mine that I share that I put up, and it's extremely frustrating to me. If you think these riots are because of George Floyd, you are sorely mistaken. George is the straw that broke the camel's back again. This is decades of anger and frustration coming out. These riots are about Eric Garner, Philando Castile, Emmett Till, Aubrey Ahmaud, Trayvon Martin, Amadou Diallo, Tamir Rice, Chavis Carter, Oscar Grant, and hundreds of, if not thousands more killed. The frustration over being over-policed and unjustly put into prison just so some corporation can turn a profit. The anger of being humiliated on a daily basis by policies such as stop and frisk. The frustration that is felt when we try to do things peacefully but are shut down. The anger felt when those in power completely ignore the cries for help. The sad thing is, many will look at this and say it's no excuse for the behavior. Well, what behavior is left? You ignore us when we talk. You say we're overreacting when we get emotional. You condemn us when we say enough is enough and tear things up. And then I have a P.S. If you don't know who the names I listed are, look them up. Most of the names I listed, one of them really, or I should say two of them really hit me hard, because one of them was the guy was shot 42 times by the police. 42 times by 4 officers. What reasoning is there for that? And then you have Tamir Rice, a small child, who the officer didn't even give him time to turn around before he opened up fire. I don't know any adult that would have the reaction time to sit there and say, oh, what's going on? And immediately know, oh, you think this is a gun? Let me drop it right now. It was literally the cop pulled up, jumped out the car, and then started shooting. That was it. So, and that's what all of this is about.
Right.
You have the policies such as stop and frisk. I don't know how many people would accept just being stopped by the police for no reason at all, just to be ID'd and frisked. Last time I checked, that was against the Fourth Amendment, but apparently not in these black communities, where it still goes on now. It's just called stop and ID, where the police have to have a reasonable assumption that you are suspicious of something. And that could be anything. And if they say, oh, we ran your ID, you have a warrant, or we want to bring you in for something, there's nothing you can do. And it's most of these things that have been going on for decades. And I mean, that about covers it.
Well, and it goes to the you're guilty until proven innocent.
Correct.
Instead of innocent until proven guilty. And honestly, all of this still is residual from segregation to slavery. It would have been completely acceptable that if you lived in a white community at time in history, that if you saw a black person running through your yard or by the street or something like that, it's okay to shoot them because they must have done something wrong.
Yeah.
That it goes back to that same mentality of
They're a runaway slave.
they're guilty until we can prove that they're innocent.
Yeah.
And so it is that systemic belief and just how do we get away from that? I don't have an answer for. But let me ask you though, Jason, are the protests are they doing anything? Are they beneficial?
Yes and no. They are getting the voice out there. People are hearing us. I don't know how much that's going to do because we've protested since the 40s, since the 50s. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. did the peaceful protest, and while things did change, it took decades for that to happen. And it still hasn't changed. That it's changed on paper, but it still hasn't changed in practice.
Sure.
We are still a very extremely segregated society. I think what would be the best option right now, along with the protest, is to use this time to actually sit down with people. Find somebody who thinks differently than you, especially in times like this where we are becoming more and more divided among racial, religious, and political sides. Sit down with somebody who thinks differently than you. Find out what they think. Find out why they think that way. You don't go into it unless it's something that you just know is obviously wrong, such as racism.
Right.
I'm going to use politics for an example. I don't know who Jason supports, but
Trump.
let's say he is a...
I don't support anybody. I support my family.
Let's say he is a Trump supporter, and me not being a Trump supporter, I'd sit down with him and say, okay, why do you support Trump? Here's why I don't. And you have to make sure you don't get into an argument about it. You don't want to sit there and say, you're wrong.
Right.
If I came to you, Shawn, about something racial and said, you're a racist, right there, anything I say after that is null and void in your mind because I've now attacked you.
Okay.
You feel the need. You're no longer going to listen to what I say to comprehend it. You're going to listen to rebuttal it. And now we're going to have an argument instead of coming to an understanding. We have to learn to find some common ground, start there, and see where it can go from there.
Well, let me play a little devil's advocate. And it's still rooted in something that I do think. So if the protesting, the point is to get the voice out there, to get the communication started. At this point in time, imagine from a white perspective for just a moment, because obviously that's the only perspective I have. So you're a white person, you see these folks on TV, they're protesting. Now, they're chanting things like no justice, no peace. You're seeing the name Black Lives Matter. And then you're seeing rioting and looting. Now, as a result of that rioting and looting, we now have curfews. So now businesses are closing earlier than they have been because they have to make curfew. So small businesses that were even struggling are struggling even more because either they're being looted or two, their employees are having to leave early to be able to make curfew. So the white folks that really need to hear this message, are they hearing it? Or are they just thinking, you know what? Them N-words monkeys is just behaving like they always do.
I think if somebody's automatically going to that point, then they're not going to hear the message no matter what. But what more people need to have is, and you were talking about this with Chris Noel, is empathy.
I agree.
You need to understand, like even I myself, as a black man, even though if you look at my skin tone, I can easily pass as white. So while I've seen the police brutality, I've actually been on the opposite end of it, where I've been stopped by the police and asked why I'm in a black neighborhood. Like, do you need an escort to get out of it?
Oh, wow.
I've literally had an officer pull me over when I was in North Philadelphia and say, "Are you okay?"
You must be lost.
And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm waiting for my family." And he's like,
This neighborhood?
"Yeah." He just looked like, "Oh my God."
That's crazy.
But yeah,
Family lives there. But my point though is that if the perception, because I'm going to be honest with you, I think that most white people's perception now of Black Lives Matter is violence. It has become synonymous with violence. If Black Lives Matter shows up to a peaceful protest, it's going to end up in violence.
I think that is due to media. Most of if you were to look at the videos, after the protest, a lot of people leave. It's new people that come in. Mm-hmm. And it just so happened that Black Lives Matter was there.
Right.
So it's other people that are coming in to actually do the protest. And I'm sorry, not the protest, the rioting. And I believe Martin Luther King said it best. Riot happens when people their voice is no longer heard. I hate to put it this way, I really do, but I can't think of any other way to say it. It's the equivalent of a child having a temper tantrum. Uh-huh. You're not being heard, and the same thing is happening over and over and over again. You've tried peaceful means. What else is left? There's a video that oh my God, Trevor Noah, he put up, and he talked about the contract of a society. There were 3 aspects to have a true society. You have to agree on the laws. You have to agree that those in charge are going to adhere to the laws, and that the laws are going to be applied to everyone equally.
Sure.
Well, 2 of those 3 have not applied to the black community. So that contract is null and void. The only reason more people aren't out there rioting is because they still feel as though they still have hope that society will look at them and say, okay, we're going to help you. But if you no longer feel as though that contract's being upheld, why not loot and riot?
Well, so this is the devil advocate to my point that I would like to be able to share with our listeners. So my problem that I'm having right now is that if the protesting starting off peacefully is not being effective because you're not being heard, so it's resulting in these outlashes, lashing out of emotion and anger, understandably. And you can even toss in, COVID at this point in time has probably played a bit of a factor. People are trapped up inside, and so there's all sorts of anxieties and stressors there as well. And so it's understandable, is what I'm saying. But the problem is that if the people that need to hear aren't listening, then all you're doing is providing them with more of a negative
Fuel for
image
a
of
fire.
you. And then on top of that, if this process is no longer effective, why isn't it effective? And this is my big point here. So, in my personal opinion, I've always been someone that's wanted to stand up, get out there, protest. I've done protests before. I've been involved in community issues, and the problem that I see is that where and I'm going to dare to say that during the civil rights movement, that there was effective change that resulted from what was done during that time frame. And to be more specific, to say that what Martin Luther King was specifically involved with produced change. Now, what's lacking today that we had then
Is the follow through.
was Martin Luther King. See, so what we had there is we had a structure. We had this hierarchy, if you will, and forgive the analogy if it
Organizational
offends.
structure.
It's an organizational structure. You had a top end leader who had his set of generals, who then had his army, if you will. They planned very specific protests to be able to bring about change. So when people said, "Oh, well, wait a second," we can't have this protest. We can't have them blocking this road. We can't have them stopping this industry or whatever. Who do we talk to? Oh, we talked to Martin Luther King. So here's a man who's also conferred with his generals, for the lack of a better term, and said, okay, what do we need to do? What is it that we want from this? How do we execute this? Because we're going to end up talking to people, and we're going to say, okay, we're going to put this on the table. This is what needs to have happen. And that's what he did. And it happened. And so it was effective by those means. The problem that we have now is that we have this social media that just blurts everything out without the thought process, without the organization, without the skilled precision of a strike that says we need to target this for this reason, and this is exactly what we're going to do and nothing else. So what happens now is that they say, hey, there's a protest down in Raleigh, North Carolina, let's go. And then everybody shows up and everybody's got their own separate agendas. And there's no true leader to say, whoa, people, this is not what we're about. Stop this. Everybody's just pandemonium doing whatever it is that they feel like that they want to do, acting out because they have this pent up, and again, justifiably pent up aggression and angst and emotions, and it's not getting communicated. So we're getting the temper tantrum of the child, but you're
Part
not
of
children. We need to be able to hear this.
It's not just the fact that we don't have a leader such as Dr. King. It's also the fact that we no longer have the follow through. I love to use the example of the Montgomery bus boycotts. Everyone sits here and says, well, let's boycott this organization because I think the latest one was Waffle House. Because of their whatever they did, calling the police on a black family that was there, and they'll boycott Waffle House for a day, 2 days. You might get a half-felt apology from Waffle House. You might get that, and then everyone drops it.
No, the same with Starbucks at one time.
Yeah.
That's
not the way it works. If you are going to go after an organization, if you want to affect change, I think the bus boycott lasted, if memory serves, it was like 183 days. And that was the community having to pull together give people rides to and from work. We don't have that type of community anymore.
But again, I still think it comes down to leadership as well. You had organized leadership that said, this is what we need to do, and continued to encourage those people. Because even when maybe the resolve was being tested, you had this leadership to be able to step in and say, brothers, sisters, we need to stay focused. We've got this goal, and it's going to work. Stay strong with me. Let's make this happen. And I think that's what part of what helps with that follow through. I think I totally agree with you that there's a complete lack of follow through. I think even Black Tuesday it illustrated that there was no follow through because there was no true organization. Yeah, you had two people that were trying to get it going and everything, but they didn't have the dynamics of the leadership to be able to support that. And I think that anybody that was, say, okay, what industry are we going to attack? How are we going to protest? Is going to look at this and go, okay, well, maybe this isn't the best idea ever. Let's do something else.
One of the other
370 days.
370 days.
That's a long time.
Yes, that's a very long time.
That's some serious resolve.
I think the thing is, even if you protest a Starbucks, a Target, a Waffle House, the only thing you're doing is having them saying, well, we're losing a lot of money. We need to get our money back. Let's go out and apologize. See, and that's why for me, that doesn't help the core issue.
The apology, you can't stop at the apology.
Right.
You have to see the things that they put into place to actually back up that apology.
Yeah.
If I slap you across the face and then say I'm sorry, you might forgive me that first time. But then if I do it a second time, you're like, oh, no. This isn't going to keep happening like this.
Right. Shame on me once. But,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have we... I feel like it's almost at least every other week I'm reading that we should be protesting Walmart.
For something.
Yes. And I'm
Christians should be protesting everything, too.
you're not going to affect any change for not buying anything for one day. Right. That was what I heard was the Blackout Tuesday was you're just not purchasing anything
streaming
unless it's from
or buying
a black-owned business for one day. And I'm like, what good is one day going to do? Yeah. That's okay. They took a hit for one day.
Well, I think one of the hard things too is I saw, and this is, this is just me trying to understand the concept of everything. Is I saw a lot of people were saying, "Hey, look, even the black-owned small businesses that were getting attacked and all this stuff." And people were like, oh, well, we'll pay for the damages due to those buildings. I'm like, couldn't that money have been used better elsewhere to do other things?
Yeah.
So to me, it was like, that's kind of a waste of money. But, I'm not going to say what should or should not happen because I understand there's anger. And the one thing I would say in terms of the riots is well, one, I've seen almost a hypocritical approach where it's been like, yeah, these places need to burn, this system needs to burn, this, that, and the other. And then as soon as, people were like, oh, these are white people doing this, it was like, oh, y'all need to stop. This doesn't represent us. So I saw that, and I don't know if it was I don't know who was saying what, but I saw both, it's like, don't do it or do it. Burn everything down. But one thing I was thinking, though, in terms of the riots and stuff is whenever, if something happens, if a legal officer, law enforcement officer does not get the type of thing that they need or some type of sentence that they need to get, or if it's, the situation hasn't been treated fairly, then people riot, tear everything up. It causes huge pandemonium. Maybe the next time they'll go ahead and make sure they book that person, or they'll go ahead and put systems into place to prevent this from happening. Because if George Floyd number 5,000 happens next week, and everything happens again, the riots, everything happens again, you gotta think they gotta call National Guard back out there. All these things have to keep reoccurring, and so hopefully, I could understand at that point, the government, the local governments or whatever, nationwide, they're like, okay, y'all, if this keeps happening, like this whole country is going to continue to be torn down and burned. So we might need to start really focus on putting some laws into effect or some
putting some real
measures.
teeth on it, though. That's the problem, because a lot of times they'll put something in place, but there's no teeth to it, meaning that it's not there's no accountability.
Right, yeah,
There's
yeah.
no way to really truly uphold it. And frankly, honestly, I think that they'll just learn to hide it better.
Yeah, or
Well,
they'll
that's
find
one
loopholes.
of the
Yeah.
main
Yeah.
issues is they have tried to put teeth on different aspects. Some counties have required officers to wear the body cameras.
Right.
I'm like, okay, that's a great idea. Next thing you know, they're sitting there saying, oh, well, there is no freedom of access to those body cameras. So
Yeah.
the public will never see what happened.
Right.
And it's like, well, you just negated the entire point
Point of it,
Or the officer's not going to get in trouble for turning off their body camera.
Yeah.
And it's like there's been videos where they actually show the officers starting to conspire something, and then one of them's like, oh yeah, click. It's like, okay, what just happened?
Right.
And it's like, you need to either have no off switch,
Right.
no ability to turn this thing off, and unlimited access to that footage. Back to your point about the no leader aspect, you said you liked history. There's a documentary about projects that were in St. Louis. It's called Pruitt Lago. I can't pronounce the last name or the other name of it. But these were projects that were built, and one of the things that caught me off guard about it and was one of the requirements was that the man could not live there. And this was during a time where it was legal to not give people a job based on race.
So that's PRUITT IGOE. If anybody wants to look it up.
Yeah.
Now, it's on Wikipedia as being like, oh, this was a huge waste of money type of thing. But if you actually watch the documentary about it, one of the things that they mentioned was that this was used to break up black families. They would offer the mother and the children and say, you can live here for an extremely reduced rate or even free, but the father cannot live here. And that was one of the turning points at that time where you started having generation after generation of black families without the father figures.
You got to have father figures. That's the
Yes.
yeah.
And that's actually one of the things that's mentioned in, I believe it was Willie Lynch, where they said break up the family structure. And
Well, and that's the reason why I've actually seen a lot of like black families or black people, black leaders who don't support Black Lives Matters, because it's almost a like we don't need men. Like I've heard who was it? I can't remember who. I think it might have been Umar Johnson, who said like the LGBT hijacked it, and it's almost become an anti-black man organization. Now I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just telling you what I've heard. And he's a very he's Pan-African, so he is like, we need all black communities, black hospital, black banks, like everything just black, only black, no white. We don't need help from anybody who's white. We need to have this community set aside for us, kind of like the reservations.
I am not quite to that point, but if you look throughout our history, the black community has never been given time to recover from slavery.
Right.
If you look back, and this is repeated time and time again, sometimes on a bigger scale, sometimes on a smaller scale. But I like to bring up Black Wall Street, where that town was thriving, and white rioters went in and destroyed it. You have the Tuskegee experiments. All these things happened over and over and over again, and then we're expected to just get over it. It's like, oh, that happened so long ago. No, those things leave scars on entire generations. I believe in another post I put online, I said my own mother was born in a time where if she lived in the South, she would not have been able to go out and eat at certain restaurants.
Right.
My mother-in-law has pointed at areas here in Smithfield where she's like, that was the door that blacks had to go in. It's closed now, but these are people that are still walking around today with these scars from Jim Crow.
Right.
There was a big old sign posted in Smithfield that said that it was home of the KKK.
Yep.
Right.
So these are not things that
And that wasn't actually that long ago. I mean,
Yeah, that was in the 70s.
My father told me about that.
Yeah. I mean, I was born not too long after that sign was up.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, this isn't like slavery where nobody alive today was a slave. Nobody alive today owned a slave. This is very recent where we still have millions of people alive that had to live through this. When you look at these pictures where you see the police with basically a law enforcement authorized lynching, you're like, some of these people could be alive today and still be in power. That has an effect on you. I told a friend of mine who she was saying quite a bit about the riots and how she's completely against them. She doesn't understand it. But then she said how she was afraid for her husband to go out because of everything that was going on. And I told her, I was like, take that fear that you feel right now for your husband. And a black person in America has to live with that fear every single day.
Let me ask you this. Now, I have seen this, people saying, well, the media makes you fearful because they say you're going to get attacked by the police, or they say this, that, and the other. What would you say to those who were saying this fear is only driven by media?
Part of it is driven by media.
Okay.
That I will agree with. But I have seen firsthand what the law enforcement does. Just with my cousin, when we were children, we were coming out of a store and he bumped into an officer by mistake. He said, "Excuse me." And the officer put him on the ground and threatened to arrest him for assaulting a police officer for a light bump. When I was 18, I used to sell knives for a company called Vector. And I had the bright idea to go door to door to sell these knives. Now, my neighborhood, they could not afford those knives. So I
Right.
went to one of the richer white neighborhoods on the outskirts of Philadelphia. And I also had the bright idea to bring my friend along, told him I'd cut him in on the profits on any sales. So of course, somebody called the cops on us. Okay, fine. But what the police did is they were threatening to arrest my friend, who is black, and then told me, even after I sat there and told them, I'm the one selling the knives. I'm the one with the knives in my backpack. He has no knives. Well, he's still the one. He's still out here selling. So am I. Well, you need to stop hanging around with these guys. They're bad influences for you.
Because did they think you were white?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I get that over and over again. One of the actual funny experiences I had, and this wasn't with law enforcement, was before I moved down here. The HR lady found out that I was black, and she started asking, like, she asked me just off chance, like, "Do you know the person that you replaced? He was black," or he didn't. She didn't say he was black. He said he was well spoken, and I'm like, "So what did he look like?" "Well, he was tall. He had short hair. He was very well spoken." I'm like, "Was he black?" It's like, "Yeah." Like, you can say you black. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, and and the thing is that it reminds me of the TV show Last Man Standing. So the wife on the show is always like very uncomfortable around black folks, and she's like, I'm a black African American. She just always stumbling over herself, and the problem is that there's that lack of relationship.
Yes.
So you don't know what to say. You don't want to be offensive, but you don't have any practical experience because you live in this cutesy little white world, and you have that privilege to be there and to do that, and to just see that person at the fast food joint handing you your food, and go about your business. And you mentioned the woman that's concerned about her husband. If you really wanted to think about it, you could say, wow, every time I go to Bojangles, which, by the way, I don't, if my nutritionist is listening, I don't go to Bojangles. I do. But, what are they going to do to my food? I mean, what? I don't know. So I can't go out to eat anymore. What about the grocery store? What about any of these businesses? Now, what really? And it comes down to not having a relationship with anybody, to not having had those communications, to be able to say, okay, I can live in fear, or I can sit there and say, okay, I'm not that way, and it's white people are funny in that, and it becomes it stems from that white privilege, because I don't have to see it, and I can ignore. I can believe the myths, I can believe the stereotypes, and I can place you inside this box, and I don't have to acknowledge anything else as truth beyond that box. And my life is fine.
Creep up in my life and affect.
Yeah. It doesn't otherwise affect me. But the problem is obviously it affects you.
Well, it affects everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, eventually, if this keeps going, there's going to be a lot more riots, and they're going to get more and more violent.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that's going to be an issue for everybody. But I mean, I would like to issue a challenge to anyone that's listening. If you're white, find somebody that you know that is a black person that you know. Offer to buy them lunch and sit and talk. Listen to the stories that they have to say. Don't prejudge, just listen.
I would venture to say, honestly, you need to have more than just one black friend to do that with.
Oh no, it needs to be done several times.
Yeah,
And
because I would
But
say
you gotta start somewhere, though.
I mean, you do, but I mean, I did have a couple friends that I grew up with who had the same life experiences as me, just the way we lived and stuff like that, and so they probably wouldn't have told me much of anything new, and so I would say you need to go with several,
Yes.
to get different
viewpoints.
exactly, because your viewpoint of being a black man, like you said, was a little different. You had the opposite side of the line with that situation in Philly.
Yes.
And so if I took you out to lunch, I wouldn't necessarily get the same perspective as I would taking like my friend Ryan down in Georgia, who almost got a gun pulled on him and his family walking through his own neighborhood.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I could give you more first-person accounts of what I've seen happen, not
Right.
that what's happened to me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, other than my incident in Oklahoma, most of what's happened to me was actually done by black people in my neighborhood saying I was not black enough.
Right.
So that was my experience growing up.
So we got a friend who, like Mitch Durrell, he said he had issues. He's actually got a song on his latest EP that's called Not Black Enough.
Well, and for him, it wasn't so much skin tone as much as his association.
Yeah, environment.
Yeah.
Interest, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and one thing that
great Star Wars nerd.
so one thing I wanted to point out, and this is something that Mitch had shared that I thought was great. Well, I guess there's two things to point out. One, when it comes to white privilege, and this probably was the best way of explaining it. It was saying that white privilege doesn't mean that you don't have a hard life or didn't have a hard life. It's that your skin color didn't contribute to it.
Right. Yeah.
So I thought that was probably the clearest I've ever heard that broken down.
Yeah.
Two,
Very well put.
when it comes to like this saying, and we haven't talked about it, I hadn't talked about it at all, but like the whole all lives matter thing. I shared a photo. Well, I don't know if I shared it openly on my page or just shared it with other people, but it was a picture of the 99 sheep over to the left, and then there was one down the hill when Jesus was turning to go get that one, and
I'm
the other
one
sheep
that shared
said,
that one for
yeah,
you.
yeah, and the other sheep says all sheep matter, and then you had the one hanging off the cliff, and I was like, dang, that's really, really, really good. I thought that was great. So here's an example of how I'm reading something that Jason gave me. Here's an example of how white privilege sounds. You keep saying it's horrible that an innocent black man was killed, but destroying property has to stop. Yeah. Try saying it's horrible that property is being destroyed, but killing innocent black men has to stop. You're prioritizing the wrong part. And I did say that in my conversation. I don't know if I said it in the actual like recorded convo or not, but I was saying how like whenever I see people that only speak out against the murder of George Floyd to say it's wrong to riot, like to me, you're canceling yourself out. You're canceling anything you just said out because you're saying so and so, but
Well, and honestly, that's one of the key elements. Yeah. It's like when you go to apologize for something. I'm sorry for smacking you, but you kind of deserved it. Exactly. Yeah. That but always is going to negate whatever preceded it.
And then and I will repeat this from the other conversation I had with Mitch and Chris because I feel like it's probably one of the better points that I probably made was like when you're looking at somebody getting killed like that, especially like George Floyd, who's completely
I still
wrong.
have not watched it. I do not.
I haven't watched
see it.
No, I haven't watched the full. I watched like 2 or 3 seconds, and that was about it.
I don't have the stomach for it.
But like whenever you say, like this person died, and then you're trying to figure out, oh well, he had a history of XYZ. Like his history does not matter in the fact that he died. And I was saying how if a mother of a heroin addict lost her son, you wouldn't go to her and say, well, it's horrible that your son died, but I mean, he was doing heroin and he was stealing from people and this, that, and the other. Like, and this is somebody who's guilty or whatever.
Of course you would.
And so you would.
I legitimately have seen and heard people do that though.
Yeah, and that's not weeping with those who weep. And so that's my point is like, look, even if he was guilty of something terrible, like, worse than the $20 counterfeit bill.
Yeah.
I'm like, the fact that he was murdered like that, like you don't try to figure out ways to justify his background behavior. And even because I've heard people do it. And people were like, well, he had a history of this, he was a felon, yada, 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 yada. None of that matters.
They do it every
case.
Single time.
They do. It's like Tamir Rice. They were like, oh, he had a toy gun, or it was horrible, but he had a toy gun. I'm like, I don't understand. And it is the other weird thing to me. I can't figure it out. I understand why the black community has an issue with cops. Sean Grant broke that down for me. He was talking about how KKK kind of pretty much infiltrated the police. Mm-hmm. And so everybody in power and police out throughout the years were all white supremacists of some sort, KKK affiliated, stuff like that. So I get that.
Frank Rizzo in Philadelphia.
I don't understand why white people are so dedicated to the law enforcement. I'm not saying I'm against law enforcement. I have friends who were cops and ex-cops. Like, so I'm not saying, but I just can't understand why every time something happens, white people immediately defend a police officer.
Because that's what society conditions us to do. I remember watching an experiment where they looked at people in authority, and how normal civilians would act. And they had a person in a police uniform walk into a building and ask for somebody's seat. There was plenty of other places that this officer could have sat down. And every single person got up and gave the officer a seat. We're conditioned to believe authority. We're conditioned to not question authority. And that's a very dangerous place to be in.
Well, I will say this. I don't think I talked about this with on the show or anything, but I do know that God established authority to bless us. But the problem is, throughout history, people have abused that authority, so we've been conditioned to not trust it. It's the same thing with marriage. Like whenever it says, like, wives submit to your husband as the church submits to Christ. Christ has not abused his authority over the church, so we can trust him to protect us, to provide for us, to take care of us, to love us, like to die for us. But look at the crappy examples of husbands throughout the history of mankind, starting with Adam. Like the very first husband sucked. And so, like, of course, women are going to be like, I don't know about that whole submission thing.
But it wasn't Adam's fault.
So anyway, so I understand. We need to get ahead and wrap this up because it's been a good conversation. But I know people are probably already logged off at this point. But Jason, we appreciate your time, man, and sharing your heart and your brains and your wisdom.
I hope to come back again.
What Shawn called it, the mind of Motley in our title for this segment here. We also want to thank you for being a Patreon supporter of the show, man. Appreciate you. Sam Blackwell, very grateful. For anybody out there interested in winning a free graphic novel from Ravi Zachariah, or he was a part of it, it's the Lamb and the Fuhrer, and essentially it's fictional, but it's the idea of what would a conversation between Hitler and Jesus look like. And so I haven't gotten it yet. I'm waiting for it to come in the mail. But what we're going to do is if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and you comment on at least one video, you will be entered in to win a comic. If you've already subscribed to the YouTube channel, we would just ask that you comment on another video or whatever.
Am I eligible?
You are eligible.
Yay.
You are. So I got several people that have been doing that. So we're grateful for that, and that comes from Kingstone Comics. So you can go check them out. We're a 50-50 commission partner with them, sales commission. And so we're going to end this out with "We Came as Romans." Carry the weight.
Carry the weight.
What kind of weight is that? Is that like weights?
Burden.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll be back in a couple weeks. Thank you so much for listening, and always remember, Jesus loves you way more than we do.
Peace.